You open your eyes to the sound of low, rumbling growls. Snow bites your bare skin, but the heat radiating from the 5 massive, deadly wolves circling you is suffocating. You brace for the end, completely unaware that the Alpha King himself has just declared you his chosen mate. The winter of 1244 was merciless, but the biting cold of the Oakhaven territory was nothing compared to the cruelty of its people. Amélie was an anomaly. In a world where wolves prided themselves on their earthy browns, deep blacks, and russet coats, Amélie was born a stark, blinding white. Her hair was the color of fresh snowfall, her skin translucent, and her eyes held the eerie, pale pink of a winter dawn. To the modern world, she was simply an albino. To the deeply superstitious medieval werewolf packs of the northern reaches, she was moon-blighted, a curse, an omen of famine and death. Because of this, Amélie was forced into the lowest possible rank within the Oakhaven pack, the Omega of Omegas. Alpha Garrett, a brutal and short-tempered man who ruled Oakhaven with an iron fist, made sure she knew her place. She was forbidden from looking any ranked wolf in the eye. She slept in the drafty stone cellars beneath the pack house, her only warmth coming from the residual heat of the kitchen ovens above. "Keep your head down, Ghost," Garrett would spit, tossing the scraps of the pack's meals onto the frozen mud for her to clean. "If it weren't for the laws of the goddess, I would have drowned you in the river the day you shifted." Amélie's wolf was small, fragile, and snow-white. She rarely shifted, as doing so only invited the aggressive dominance displays of the younger, stronger wolves. Her only solace was Clara, an older, crippled beta who had been demoted to kitchen duty after a hunting accident. Clara would sneak Amélie hardened crusts of bread and jars of warm tallow to soothe her cracked, bleeding hands. Everything changed on the eve of the winter solstice. Whispers had torn through the pack house all week. King Alaric of the Iron Crown, the supreme alpha of the northern reaches, was making a royal progression through the territories. Alaric was a legend written in blood. He had conquered 3 rogue territories before his 25th winter, and his wolf was rumored to be the size of a warhorse. He was unmarried, unmated, and notoriously ruthless. When the warning horns blew, signaling the king's arrival, panic seized Oakhaven. Alpha Garrett, desperate to present a perfect, prosperous pack to his liege, immediately turned his sights on Amélie. "Lock the freak in the root cellar," Garrett snarled to his enforcers. "If the king sees her, he will think we are harboring a plague. She does not come out until the royal banners are gone. Do you understand?" Amélie was shoved down the rotting wooden stairs into the pitch-black root cellar. The heavy iron latch slammed shut above her, plunging her into damp darkness. She curled into a ball on the dirt floor, shivering as the muffled sounds of feasting, howling, and celebration echoed from the great hall above. 2 days passed. The cold seeped into her bones. Her water skin ran dry, and the agonizing pangs of hunger clawed at her stomach. On the 3rd night, a terrible commotion shook the floorboards above. Shouts, the shattering of timber, and the terrifying, bone-rattling roar of a monstrous alpha filled the air. Then, silence. Desperate for water and believing the pack might have been attacked by rogues, Amélie noticed the cellar latch had been knocked loose by the tremors. Trembling, she pushed the doors open and crawled out into the freezing night. The courtyard was empty, but the snow was trampled and stained with dark patches of blood. Terrified, Amélie bolted toward the dense tree line, aiming for the frozen creek to break the ice and drink. She didn't make it to the water. Halfway through the dense pine forest, the temperature seemed to plummet. The wind died completely. Amélie froze. The primal instincts of her Omega wolf screamed at her to drop to her belly and submit. Emerging from the shadows of the ancient pines was a wolf unlike anything she had ever seen. It was pitch black, its fur absorbing the moonlight, standing nearly as tall as a draft horse at the shoulder. Its eyes were pools of molten gold, burning with an intensity that stopped Amelie's heart. She dropped to her knees in the snow, bowing her white head, shaking violently. A rogue, a demon. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the massive jaws to snap her neck. The beast stepped closer. The heat rolling off its massive body washed over her freezing skin. It sniffed her hair, a deep, rumbling growl vibrating in its chest. The sound wasn't a threat. It was something else, something possessive and earth-shattering. But Amélie, starved, terrified, and pushed beyond her physical limits, couldn't comprehend it. As the massive black wolf nudged her chin with its snout, her vision swam, the golden eyes blurring into darkness as she collapsed face first into the snow, losing consciousness entirely. Amélie woke to the agonizing sensation of warmth. Her eyelashes fluttered open, and panic instantly seized her throat. She was no longer in the snowy clearing. She was lying on a bed of thick, luxurious bear pelts, the heat of a roaring campfire nearby. But that wasn't what stopped her breath. She was surrounded. 5 enormous wolves, 2 slate gray, 1 auburn, and 2 brindled, stood in a perfect, defensive circle around her. They were all facing outward, their muscles coiled, teeth bared at the surrounding forest. They were guarding her. Before she could even whimper, a figure stepped through the circle of wolves. The wolves immediately dropped their heads in submission, parting to let the man through. It was King Alaric. He was out of his wolf form, clad in heavy leather armor and a thick black wolf fur cloak. His dark hair was swept back from a face carved from granite, marred only by a thin, jagged scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. His eyes, those same terrifying molten gold eyes she had seen in the woods, locked onto her pale form. Amélie scrambled backward, her hands scraping against the frozen dirt, instantly dropping her chin to her chest. "Mercy, my lord," she croaked, her voice raspy from disuse and thirst. I did not mean to intrude on your hunting grounds. I am nothing. Please." She expected a strike. She expected to be thrown to the guards. Instead, a heavy, velvet-lined cloak fell over her shivering shoulders. She flinched, looking up through her white lashes. Alaric was kneeling in the snow before her, close enough that she could smell him, a dizzying, intoxicating scent of pine needles, wood smoke, and sharp winter air. His massive, calloused hand reached out, hovering just an inch from her pale cheek, before he abruptly pulled it back, as if fighting a violent urge. "You are freezing." His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated straight through to her marrow. He didn't ask a question. He stated a fact, his tone laced with a dangerous, barely suppressed fury. But the fury wasn't directed at her. Suddenly, the brush rustled violently. Alpha Garrett burst into the clearing, flanked by 2 of his Oakhaven enforcers. Garrett looked utterly panicked. "My king!" Garrett gasped, falling to one knee. He looked up and his eyes widened in horror as he saw Amélie wrapped in the king's own cloak. "Your Grace, I beg your forgiveness. This creature is a blight on my pack. She escaped her confinement. I will dispose of her immediately so she does not offend your royal eyes." Crack. The sound echoed through the silent forest like a thunderclap. Amélie screamed, covering her head. When she dared to look, Alpha Garrett was on the ground, his jaw grotesquely dislocated. King Alaric stood over him, his chest heaving, his hands balled into fists, his knuckles white. The 5 guard wolves had instantly turned inward, snarling viciously at the Oakhaven enforcers, who had dropped to their bellies in absolute terror. "You locked her away," Alaric said. The calmness in his voice was far more terrifying than a shout. It was the calm of a predator about to kill. "You starved her." "She is an Omega, a cursed one," Garrett gurgled through a mouthful of blood, failing to understand the gravity of his situation. "She brings bad harvests." Alaric's golden eyes flared with a sudden, violent red ring. "Kaelin," the king commanded, not taking his eyes off Garrett. The largest of the gray wolves shifted seamlessly into a tall, imposing man with calculating brown eyes. "Yes, my king. Strip Alpha Garrett of his title. Have him bound in iron and dragged behind the carriages. If he survives the journey to Ethelgard, he will face the royal tribunal for crimes against the crown. If he dies, leave him for the crows." Garrett's muffled screams were quickly silenced as Kaelin and another guard dragged him away. Amélie sat paralyzed, her mind completely unable to process what was happening. Why would the Supreme Alpha care about the mistreatment of a moon-blighted Omega? "We ride for Ethelgard within the hour," Alaric announced to his men. He turned back to Amélie. The terrifying, murderous aura completely vanished the second his eyes met hers. He offered his hand. "Come." Amélie shrank back. I cannot, my king." I am of Oakhaven. I belong in the dirt. Pain flashed across Alaric's stoic features. He didn't force her. Instead, he simply scooped her up into his arms, pelts and all, as easily as if she weighed nothing. Amélie froze stiff, terrified to even breathe against his royal armor. By dawn, they were on the move. The royal procession was massive. Amélie was placed alone inside a heavily guarded, velvet-lined carriage, a luxury she had never even seen, let alone experienced. She sat huddled in the corner, clutching the king's cloak around herself, her mind racing with a singular, terrifying conclusion. I am a prisoner. He is taking me to the capital to execute me as a spectacle, a sacrifice to the goddess for a good winter. On the second day of the journey, the carriage door swung open during a brief halt. It wasn't the king. A stunning woman stepped inside, pulling the door shut behind her. She had glossy auburn hair, striking emerald eyes, and wore the expensive dyed furs of high nobility. This was Lady Eleanor of House Moreland. Eleanor was the daughter of the wealthiest duke in the northern reaches, and it was a poorly kept secret that she was maneuvering to become Alaric's queen. Eleanor looked at Amélie the way one might look at a rat that had drowned in a wine barrel. So, Eleanor sneered, pulling off her leather riding gloves. This is the little freak the king found in the mud. Amélie instantly lowered her eyes, her omega instincts forcing her into submission before the powerful female. My lady. Eleanor laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. She stepped closer, grabbing a fistful of Amélie's white hair and yanking her head up. Amélie whimpered in pain. Listen to me very carefully, ghost, Eleanor whispered venomously. Do not mistake the king's pity for favor. Alaric collects oddities. He has a two-headed snake in his menagerie, and now he has a white-haired omega. You are a pet. A spectacle. Eleanor released her hair, wiping her hand on her cloak as if touching Amélie had soiled her. He will parade you before the court. Let the scholars gawk at your red eyes, and then you will be thrown into the dungeons when he grows bored. Do not dare to look at him. Do not dare to speak to him. If you step out of line, I will have my father's guards skin you and use your white pelt for a rug. Am I understood? Yes, my lady, Amélie cried softly, tears spilling down her pale cheeks. I understand. It made perfect sense to her. It fit everything she knew about the world. She was a freak, a pet, a doomed curiosity. When the towering black stone gates of Ethelgard finally loomed over the horizon a week later, Amélie's heart felt like lead. As the carriage rolled through the iron portcullis, she dared to peek out the window. King Alaric was riding his massive destrier right beside her window. He caught her eye, and for a fleeting second, the brutal Alpha King offered her a small, fiercely protective smile. Amélie quickly shut the curtain, terrified. She had no idea that beneath the heavy armor, Alaric's wolf was clawing at his mind, howling in triumph, ready to burn the entire kingdom to the ground to protect the fragile, white-haired mate he had finally found. Ethelgard was a fortress carved from the bones of the mountain, a sprawling citadel of black iron and polished obsidian that pierced the winter sky. When Amélie was finally led from the carriage, she kept her eyes glued to the cobblestones, trembling so violently she could barely walk. She braced herself for the damp chill of a dungeon. Instead, Commander Kaelin escorted her to the highest tower in the sunlit eastern wing. The heavy oak doors opened to reveal a chamber larger than the entire Oakhaven packhouse. Roaring fireplaces warmed the room to a balmy temperature. Thick, woven tapestries depicting ancient wolf lore covered the stone walls, and the bed was a mountain of plush down and silk. The king has ordered that you want for nothing, Lady Amélie, Kaelin stated respectfully, bowing his head slightly. Martha, the head housekeeper, will attend to your needs. Amélie simply stood in the center of the lavish room, hugging her thin arms. As soon as Kaelin left, an older, plump woman with kind gray eyes bustled in, followed by two maids carrying tubs of steaming water and vials of scented oils. Oh, you poor frozen little bird, Martha cooed, ushering the terrified Omega toward the bath. Let us get the dirt of the road off you. For the next 2 weeks, Amélie lived in a state of suspended terror. She was bathed. Her moon-white hair was brushed until it gleamed like spun silk, and she was fed rich meats and roasted root vegetables until her hollow cheeks began to fill out. Yet, her mind was a prison of anxiety. King Alaric never visited. To the rest of the kingdom, the king's absence was a sign of a busy monarch managing the fallout of stripping a regional alpha of his title. But in Amelie's traumatized mind, his absence was confirmation of Eleanor's cruel words. He collects oddities. You are a pet. A spectacle. Why else would he lock her in a lavish cage, fatten her up, and refuse to look at her? In her old pack, Omegas were only fed well right before a brutal winter hunt to ensure they had the stamina to act as bait. In truth, King Alaric was fighting a desperate war within his own mind. The Alpha King's wolf was completely unhinged by the proximity of his mate. Every instinct screamed at him to break down her door, drag her into his bed, and mark her. But Alaric knew the horrific abuse she had suffered. He knew that if he approached her with the overwhelming, possessive dominance of an Alpha King, she would shatter. He was giving her time to realize she was safe, unaware that Lady Eleanor was actively poisoning the silence. The climax of the winter season, the solstice mating ball, was rapidly approaching. It was the night unmated wolves found their partners, and the night Alaric intended to publicly crown his queen. 2 nights before the ball, the door to Amelie's chamber clicked open. It wasn't Martha bringing her supper. It was Lady Eleanor, flanked by a towering, scarred man wearing the insignia of House Morland, her father's personal guard captain, Darrow. "You clean up well, ghost," Eleanor sneered, stepping into the room and locking the door behind her. She eyed Amelie's new silk dressing gown with deep disdain. "But you cannot scrub the curse from a moon-blighted Omega." Amelie instantly dropped to her knees, bowing her head. "My lady, the king's patience has run dry," Eleanor lied, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "The solstice ball is a celebration of purity and strength. He has realized that presenting a cursed albino to the High Lords will incite a rebellion. He has ordered my guards to dispose of you quietly tonight in the lower fighting pits. You are to be fed to the rogues." All the blood drained from Amelie's face. The terrifying scenario made perfect sense. It was exactly what Alpha Garrett would have done. "However," Eleanor continued, kneeling down to forcibly lift Amelie's chin, "I am not as cruel as they say. I have secured a carriage at the servants' gate. Captain Darrow will escort you out of Ethelgard. You will run into the wild, and you will never return. Do you understand?" Amelie nodded frantically, tears spilling from her pale pink eyes. Yes, thank you, my lady. I will disappear." "See that you do," Eleanor whispered, a victorious, wicked gleam in her emerald eyes. "Take her, Darrow. If she makes a sound, cut out her tongue." The descent into the bowels of Ethelgard was agonizing. Captain Darrow's grip on Amelie's arm was like an iron vice, bruising her pale skin. They bypassed the servants' gate entirely, spiraling deeper and deeper down damp, mold-covered stone stairs, until the air smelled of wet fur, copper, and rotting meat. They were not heading to a carriage. They were in the dungeon levels, approaching the containment cells of the feral rogues kept for execution spectacles. The terrifying snarls of maddened wolves echoed through the dark corridors. "Please," Amelie whispered, her bare feet bleeding on the jagged stones. "The gate. We missed the gate." Darrow let out a dark chuckle, shoving her violently into a circular stone arena. The heavy iron portcullis slammed shut behind them. "Lady Eleanor sends her regards. Omega. The king cannot claim a mate who was torn to shreds trying to escape." Amelie scrambled backward until her spine hit the freezing, slime-coated wall. Across the arena, 3 heavy iron doors were rattling on their hinges as the feral wolves behind them caught her scent. Darrow drew his broadsword, stepping toward her. He didn't intend to let the wolves do all the work. He was going to cripple her first. Amelie squeezed her eyes shut. She prepared for the searing pain of the blade, but as the steel hissed through the air, something ancient and primal snapped inside her. The fragile, terrified Omega wolf within her soul, pushed to the absolute brink of death, refused to die silently. Amelie didn't cower. She threw her head back, and from the depths of her chest tore a sound that shook the very foundations of Ethelgard. It was not a whimper. It was a soul-shattering, desperately sorrowful howl. It was the sacred, unmistakable call of a mate facing death. Hundreds of feet above, the great hall was filled with the finest nobility of the northern reaches. King Alaric sat upon his obsidian throne, dressed in ceremonial armor, waiting for Martha to escort Amelie down so he could finally announce his claim. Lady Eleanor stood near the dais, sipping wine, feigning innocence. Then the howl struck. To the ordinary wolves, it was a distant, mournful cry. To Alaric, it was a physical blow. The mate bond, dormant but undeniable, ignited in his blood like wildfire. Alaric's wine goblet shattered in his fist. His eyes flared a brilliant, terrifying crimson. A roar of absolute, unadulterated savagery ripped from his throat, silencing the music and dropping half the nobility to their knees in submission. "Alfred!" Alaric bellowed, his bones audibly cracking as his wolf fought to tear through his human skin. "Lock the doors! No one leaves!" Before anyone could react, the king vaulted over the tables, moving with blinding, unnatural speed. He didn't bother with the stairs. He tore through the heavy wooden doors of the hall, plunging into the dark stairwells, following the agonizing pull of his dying mate. Back in the pit, Darrow hesitated, momentarily stunned by the sheer volume of Amelie's cry. That hesitation cost him his life. The heavy oak door leading to the arena exploded inward, sending splinters the size of javelins flying across the room. A massive, monstrous black wolf larger than any nightmare, its fur bristling with lethal intent and eyes glowing with demonic fury, crashed into the stone pit. Darrow barely had time to scream before the Alpha King was upon him. It was not a fight, it was an execution. With one horrific snap of his jaws, Alaric ended the threat to his mate. The feral wolves in the adjoining cages, sensing the apex predator in the room, immediately stopped snarling and whined, pressing themselves into the furthest corners of their cells in absolute terror. Amelie remained pressed against the wall, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. The black beast dropped Darrow's ruined sword, his chest heaving, his muzzle stained crimson. Slowly, the massive wolf turned its glowing golden eyes toward her. He didn't shift back to human form. He stalked toward her, a low, vibrating rumble echoing in the chamber. Amelie sank to her knees, waiting for the beast to finish what Darrow had started. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "I'm sorry, I tried to run. Please." The beast didn't bite her. Instead, the giant black wolf dropped heavily onto its belly in the dirt right in front of her. It whined a high, pitiful sound completely at odds with its monstrous size and gently nudged her bloody, trembling hands with its massive, wet nose. Amelie gasped, opening her eyes. The Alpha King's wolf was submitting to her. Slowly, carefully, the wolf shifted. Bone and muscle reformed until King Alaric knelt before her in his human skin, completely uncaring of his ruined clothes or the blood on his hands. He reached out, his touch so incredibly gentle as he brushed the stark white hair from her tear-stained face. "My beautiful girl," Alaric choked out, his deep voice cracking with raw emotion. "My queen, what have they done to you?" I am a curse," Amelie whispered, her mind unable to grasp the reality unfolding before her. Lady Eleanor said, "You meant to feed me to the rogues, that I was a pet." A dark, terrifying shadow crossed Alaric's face at the mention of Eleanor's name, but he quickly masked it for Amelie's sake. He carefully gathered her into his arms, lifting her against his broad chest. The warmth of his skin sent a rush of overwhelming peace through her exhausted body. "Eleanor is a dead woman walking," Alaric promised, his voice cold as ice. "You are no pet, Amelie. You are no curse. You are my fated mate. The goddess molded you from the moonlight itself, and I will burn this entire kingdom to the ground before I let anyone hurt you again." He carried her out of the blood-stained pit, refusing to let anyone else touch her. When King Alaric kicked open the ruined doors of the great hall, carrying the bruised, barefoot, white-haired Omega in his arms, the entire court fell deathly silent. Lady Eleanor, seeing Darrow's blood on the king's hands and the murderous, glowing red in his eyes, collapsed in a dead faint. Alaric carried Amelie straight to the royal dais. He didn't set her down. He turned to face the terrified nobility of the northern reaches, his voice echoing like thunder across the vaulted ceilings. Behold your queen. Alaric commanded, the supreme dominance of his aura, forcing every single werewolf in the room, alphas, betas, and omegas alike, to drop to their knees and bare their necks in absolute submission. Amélie looked out over the sea of bowed heads. For 20 years, she had been spat on, starved, and told she was a monster. Now, wrapped in the fiercely protective arms of the most powerful alpha in the world, the albino omega finally realized the truth. She wasn't a blighted curse. She was the absolute ruler of them all. Amélie's journey from a terrified, abused omega to a fiercely loved and powerful alpha queen proves that your greatest perceived weakness might actually be your ultimate strength. Did you expect Lady Eleanor's vicious betrayal or King Alaric's brutal romantic rescue in the dungeons? If this werewolf romance kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe for more epic paranormal dramas.